my expression of this is that where we've been is like the Beatles in Hamburg. And it's been like a small group of people for a bunch of early years getting so many reps, playing our 800 shows and having our 2 albums worth of songs and really figuring out how to do what we do. And now I think like I'm feeling the itchiness of like, okay, but like what if we, went to India and studied transcendental meditation and made Sgt. Pepper? Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Brave New Work, a podcast about reinventing our organizations and the search for a more adaptive and human way of working. I'm Rodney Evans, and I am joined, as always, by my throat-coated co-host.
Hello.
It's a T. Okay. On today's episode, we're going to talk about challenges around ownership, stewardship, leadership, just general bus driving on projects and initiatives, particularly in self-managing environments, because it is tricky. But before we unpack that, we're going to do a check-in round, and Aaron is going to run it.
So we're going to begin every episode with a check-in. This episode's check-in question for today is, what is a lie that you tell for your own convenience? So to get out of things or to get around things or just to make your life easier or better in some way, a lie that you tell. You start and I'll go second.
A lie that I tell for my own convenience is that I'm going to bed.
And what are you actually doing?
Reading.
So it might be in bed, but you're not asleep.
Yeah, exactly. And
Nice.
And that will be, it's not usually like inside my house. I don't have to lie to Ed about that because both of us are very happy to be alone together. But like if I am out in the world, I will definitely be like, I have to go to sleep. And what I mean is I have to not be here.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I would say mine is probably a pretty popular pandemic one. We'll see what the listeners think. But occasionally I'm coming out of a meeting that ended roughly on time and there's another one right away. Right? And there's another one right away. And I'm just, for my own mental health, I'm like, I don't think I can just go door to door. I need 5 minutes. And so the other meeting will be, air quotes, running late.
Don't lie to me. Did you do that on the way to this recording?
No.
No, that
like, was
this
actually
meeting
happening.
Is wrapping up. Like, was it?
Well, it was, though, honestly. Sarah Devereaux, friend of the show, will tell you I was literally on. I'm not going to pull the shit with you. But yeah,
Sarah,
it does.
I'll call you later.
I would say at least once a day, I'm like, ooh, it's running late. I'm going to need 5. And that's to make a tea or to take a moment and just stare into nothingness.
Yeah, we all need that. We just need a minute. I feel like that is our energy today, folks, is we just need a minute.
We just need a minute.
So today's topic is this delicate dance of ownership and self-management. And I'm going to start by asking you, what makes this so tricky? Because it does seem to be.
It is confounding. The first thing I want to clarify is that when we're saying ownership in this description, there are air quotes around that as well, because we're not talking about equity. We're not talking about shareholding or anything like that. We're talking about who's driving the bus. And so words that you might hear in a traditional system like accountability, focus, attention, urgency, assurance, those are the sorts of ideas that underpin this. And it really is a question of when there's a project or an initiative or a circle or a team or something in a self-managing system that needs to be stewarded, that needs to be, nudged towards the future, who exactly is doing that and how are they doing that? And what we're finding, and I think we'll unpack today, I hope to get to the bottom of it, is that it's easy if you're not careful in a decentralized system for everybody to be working on something, but nobody to really be caretaking for it and really making sure that it's healthy and that it's going the distance. What would you add to that?
I am feeling this more. Here's why I'm feeling this more right now. And I'm going to make just like my own legal disclaimer right now. I have COVID. I'm not sleeping well. I'm very tired. I'm very cranky. I'm pandemic irritated. And so if that comes through, please, to my teammates who I love very much, it's not directed at you. It's just my general state of mind.
That's
but it is related to
trailer.
This. Because here's the thing, is right now in this moment of work and pandemic and all of the things, when someone else doesn't like really grab the reins and sweat something, I'm not a person who won't keep one eye on it.
Yeah.
and I have one eye on too many things right now.
Hmm.
And so what's grating on me, and this is at home too. This is like everywhere in my life. What's grating on me right now is that though a lot of things and roles and projects are theoretically owned by other people, I they're not held in such a way that I can forget about them. And so they're just like this cognitive tax,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
normally in Rodney's healthy brain would be like, oh, I'm sure that's coming. I'll just forget about it. But
Right.
in my burnout brain, it's just like at 2 o'clock in the morning, it just pops into my head. And I'm like, I haven't heard anything about that in 6 weeks. I wonder if that like check got set or that account got closed or that Notion project got spun up or that client call ever got scheduled. And so it feels bigger and heavier than it would in other situations, I guess,
Yeah.
or when I'm in better situations.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there is the underlying drumbeat of my energy is like make shit happen energy. And
Yeah.
so whenever I'm collaborating with anyone anywhere, I do have to play with the balance between like where do I apply that energy as an actor, as someone who's using it to make something happen or create something? Where do I focus that energy as a collaborator and potentially like a feedback provider? And
Hmm.
where do I just have to let it go and let things, happen at the pace they're going to happen or to the degree they're going to happen? But I do have this craving, and obviously there's probably a lot of stories underneath this, identity stories, cultural stories, etc. But I have this craving for like more collaborators in my life that are just knocking walls down and like moving in service of the purpose with a certain level of vigor.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. And I think the thing is in self-management that's tricky. I mean, we'll talk more about all of the various aspects of this is that first of all, we all have a portfolio of things that we're doing. And so
Yeah.
everyone has their own sort of equalizer where they're prioritizing.
Yep.
And there are things that probably are higher on my list in terms of I would love to see this done than they are on the list of the person who has taken responsibility for doing them. Like that's just
Totally.
the reality of this. And we do work in a way that's more fractal and that's more dynamic and that's also means it's more piecemeal
It
than
may
just
cut
like
across organizations even.
absolutely. Absolutely. Then like, if I had an employee and every week in the one-on-one I was like, let's do another review of that report, that's dumb, but it also is clear.
Right.
And this way of working is trickier. And I think that there is a patience that, again, that I'm just like lacking at the moment. And it sounds like maybe you are too, where because in the liminal space between here's an idea that we are signing up for as a group and one person in particular has raised their hand and here is the first asset product move increment of progress in that liminal space there's like a lot of noise
Yeah.
and like what I'm finding and even inside the ready there are examples of this is like once a day someone is asking a question around transparency around governance and I'm like we we have a solution it's not here yet we either need a different solution now or to all just like take a beat and wait for the solution
Right.
but in the meantime once a day I'm tagged in Slack to answer a question about it
Right. Right. Right.
and like that's the kind of stuff where it's like just like the balance of patience and emergence
Right.
is tricky because you can't like I mean you can go like force stuff you can force stuff to be done but if you want to practice in such a way that the constraint is we've agreed to do it someone has raised their hand and it will come and then we are going to let it happen then you have to like live with the pace at which that happens even if it's not super comfortable for you.
So I think this is another third way episode because what I'm
Oh
hearing
good.
is there are two polarities here. One is I'm going to be the structural reason that stuff gets done at the pace and level of, quality and intentionality that I want. And so I like my own burden and my own acting in the system is going to be the solution, which is not
Mhm.
scalable, sustainable, healthy, etc.
Super exhausting. That's how we ended up in
Or
18 roles.
Right. Or I'm going to let the tensions emerge around things that are needed. And then eventually it'll reach a fever pitch enough that the system will want to address it. And when they want to address it, solutions and people will appear and eventually come to some conclusions or some solutions. But that is obviously a much more patient, to your point, and more emergent solution. The good news about that way of doing it is that usually, not always, but usually those solutions get very baked in to the culture and the norms and the structure.
And are
Not
better
always.
because they're not like forced.
Yeah. But I think there's a third way here around this idea of how do we want to show up to the things we're showing up to, and what kind of clarity do we need to have about the roles we're playing
Yeah.
that might not be all the way there in a lot of the decentralized systems that we work in and work with, where it is a little bit more of a free for all. I mean, for example, thinking about like a DAO or a new Web3 entity, there might be 1,000 people in the Discord, and they're all like, "How can I help? How can I help? How can I help?" And there's a few people building something behind the scenes, and there's not a lot of clarity about roles, opportunities, who's driving what. That hasn't even happened yet. And
Right.
even in a system as old as ours, 6 years going on 7, there's still a lot of stuff that maybe has loose clarity about who stewards it or who holds the space, but there's way less clarity about what level of execution or intentionality we expect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Well, and I think there's a thing happening that I see in DAOs that also is very related to early days of self-management. And if people, go back and listen to Alistair's episode of this podcast about onboarding into self-management, there's a thing where it's like people who come into contributors who come into systems fresh have a lot of energy, and they tend to have more capacity because
Right.
they're not already sucked into so many things. And they tend to be like, I want to help and I want to contribute, which is awesome. Except that usually that requires folks that have some institutional knowledge or have been driving something to invest.
Right.
And so there is this challenge when you've got a lot of sort of unbridled energy and potential, but even having those contributors contribute effectively requires the stewards of the work.
Yeah. It's a coherence problem again, because I
Totally.
deal with this all the time where I'm thinking about there are people that could do this work. Like, for example, let's get someone to go write an article on behalf
Sure.
of the Ready or Murmur. There's lots of people that could do that work. You can write an article that would be beautiful to read. The question becomes, will it be coherent with the principles and practices of the company that it represents? So will it actually represent us well in the way that we want to be represented as a community? And the degree to which that person has been embedded in the system has a lot to do with how likely that is to be the case. Because if someone is like
Absolutely.
fresh off the boat and they come in and you're like, hey, write an article about, how to make decisions on behalf of the Ready, chances are it's not going to be 100% where we want it to be at a coherence level with all of our other material.
Yeah.
Day one.
Yeah.
So then what, right? You're at this like tension between capacity to act and lead and the coherence required and the knowledge required to do it, in a way that meshes with the system.
That plus
Plus one.
Just building on that example, to do that, if someone raises their hand to do that, there's the piece of it that's around coherence, and then there's also the mechanics. So that new person or that external person is going to be like, where do we publish? What are the creds? Do I get paid for this? How much should I get paid?
Yeah.
Who should I ask for advice about getting paid? Okay, I'm going to get paid. How do we get paid here? Do I put that in Notion? What's Notion? And like on and on and on and on and on it goes. Yeah. And again, this is like not a knock on those human beings. It's just an illustration of how it's hard. How it's hard. Just how it's hard. It's hard, and how even as more, it's like, it's so often just feels like more humans, more problems, until we're at a point where so much of the hygiene and the mechanics is taken care of that people can really fly.
Yeah, I like the idea that is emerging here around something like a contribution ecology.
Yeah.
Like, what are all the systems around being able to contribute and being able to contribute well?
Right.
That's like the first half of the puzzle, which is how do you nurture people so that they can find the answers to those questions, find the work that needs to be done, find ways to do it in, in a sense that is coherent with the whole. And then the back half of this for me is still more about um, coherence around style at some level, like the level of
Mm,
intensity, the level of ambition, the level of quality control, etc. There are very different communities out there in terms of what's expected and how you execute. And
mhm,
so I think having some conversations as a system and maybe some agreements about, are we a sweat the details crowd? Are we a like go big crowd, or a go, or like, tread lightly? I just think there are different ways of showing up to these problems where if I'm writing an article, what are my even overs in terms
mhm,
of reach, in terms of tone, in terms of coherence with the rest of the messaging? Is it supposed to be innovative and break ground? Is it the start of a bunch of articles? Like, are we committing to a much longer chain of things? And a lot of this boils down to me to vision,
mhm,
and to either aligning with or having your own vision for something. Like, where are we going? And I would say it's one area where I find myself occasionally frustrated, which is funny because being a founder, having some vision is an advantage for me. It's helped me in my career and my life. But at the same time, there's a deep craving for like other people that can either see and run with or expand vision and have some of their own and be like, you know what? I don't need you to tell me another thing about publishing at the ready. I've got a vision for it.
mhm.
And I'm going to realize that vision.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's such a big part of it. I also think there's a very human side of this, which is
Yeah.
in any self managing system, there's a question of, are you contributing to like make your mark and
Hmm.
build your reputation, or are you contributing because you know what the collective needs? And
Right.
whether that's an article or whether that's taking on a project or taking on a new role or whatever, it's like, are you trying to get your reps? Are you trying to get noticed? Are you trying to learn? Incidentally, and like no shade on any of those things, all of those things are really necessary.
Right.
And also, I think when you sit where I sit in our system, I'm like, that's great for you. That might not help me with anything.
Yeah. Yeah. To turn the lens on myself critically for a second, and maybe you can give me some advice here, but something that I have been sitting with around this topic related to those dynamics is how how do you make space for vision and ownership to emerge
Hmm.
versus just making space?
Yeah.
And like the difference between stepping away from something versus leaving space around something and it'll actually be, and someone will actually take over. And I worry, honestly, like one of my insecurities about the Ready and Murmur, but more the Ready because we have more history, is that there's some kind of psychic ownership over things that I'm no longer loving, that I'm no longer
Mm,
nurturing, that other people are hesitant to like make declarative statements about or move or replace vision on
yeah.
because they're thinking like, that's kind of Aaron's thing.
Right.
And that's really scary because at the end of the day, we're sitting on all these lines of business and all these pieces of IP that could in their own right be huge businesses.
Right.
If someone would just say like, "Hey, we haven't touched physical products in a while. I'd like to take that over and I have a vision for how that's going to be like a huge, 10,000 customer business that's going to change the world with paper goods." And
Yeah.
and for me that would be like so exciting. But what I worry about at night is like, have I loved that stuff just enough and too much that people are like, I'll have to deal with Dignan if I want to like really take that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think to the first part of your question, I think it's a parsing of, will people not step into it because they think that you are holding implicit expectations about how things should be done that they don't think they can meet, or they don't want to meet, or they don't want to try to get your attention to
Yeah.
meet, versus are there are there just spaces that are unattended and assumptions that you are attending them? And those are two different things. Like, I think when you are explicitly like, I can't do this, I trust you, please take it, I'll keep my mouth shut, that creates like a different kind of space
Yeah.
than this is open and it's always been mine. So like
Right.
that's like one part of that thing,
Right.
because in the latter, people bring a lot of stories, a lot of
Yeah.
stories to that dynamic. And then I think the other thing is, and Allie and I had like a 90-minute, very very mind expanding, very like we were on acid conversation yesterday. That was amazing. That ranged the spectrum from like reimagining, what the future of work version of all training is, and what our it went all over the place, and it was very inspiring. I was very excited. And the truth is, for us right now, and probably for a lot of people who are in similar situations right now, we've grown so quickly that there are a lot of people who are just out there doing our core business and learning how to deliver it really well. And like, thank God, because we didn't used to have that. And like,
Right.
that's why you and I used to be on every project. I looked the other day, I've done 30 projects at the Ready. That's too
Yeah.
many.
That's a chunk.
Yeah. So that's a real thing. So if you carve off like the, 60+% of the people at the Ready who are just learning to be dope transformers and or hold a project fully by themselves. Project architecture, selling, the whole banana. That's the vast majority of the humans right there.
Totally.
Which like, that's cool. That's where we're at. That's our core business. Again, I'm delighted by all of the humans we have and how amazing they are.
And that's still stewardship and ownership.
100% super important stewardship. And I also think this is God, I'm going to just like tangent myself to death here, but I think that's a really important part to tease out of what we're saying, because I would argue none of the core business is unstewarded. It's the garden. It's the cobbler's kid has no shoes stewardship. So like, I don't think there are client projects out there that are like, that are tipsy.
Right,
like, people deeply own and steward that work.
Yes.
It's just all the other stuff. And this brings me to my resourcing point, because, Allie is one of the most experienced transformers at the Ready.
Yep.
We want her on everything, and we want her teaching and helping and coaching the next wave of transformers. So what is the resourcing play that allows Allie to have the space and time to launch a product business, which she has 3 years of ideas about?
Yeah.
That's the, and look, these are champagne problems and I'll have them all day. And also they're real in the moment when you feel like, or I feel like, or Allie, or probably a lot of other people at the Ready just feel like our ambitions and our hopes and our expectations of ourselves are so far outpacing the reality of human beings who have a certain amount of capacity.
Yeah, that's right. And I think what it brings me to is this idea of our nature as individuals. And I sort of go on record believing that, putting aside socialization, a lot of us have a lot more capacity to do different kinds of work and different kinds of leadership, entrepreneurship, visioning, et cetera, than we think we do, because of the way that we've experienced life. However, given that we do all have where we are now with our personalities and our ideas and our ambitions, I think at the end of the day, a system like ours or any decentralized system has to identify who in among us just out of the box has vision and ambition around different aspects of our purpose. Mm. And let's make sure that even at the expense of some of those trade-offs that you just described, that they're able to express that in the way that best serves us. Right. So even if someone is a dope transformer or a dope accountant or a dope coach, if they possess a vision and an ambition and an entrepreneurial spirit around one of our 5 pillars, it might just be more useful to the purpose to kind of release them on that, because of the rarity of that. Because it's so hard to find someone to really create when the playbook isn't written. And I think that's the difference, is like doing something that we know how to do and takes practice and learning and mastery is fantastic and amazing. And most systems require that to even survive. And then there's always the little things on the edge where it's like, there is no playbook here. We don't know what works. We don't know how it's going to work. And that's exploratory work. And it starts to, I think, become a bit of a pipeline. And this brings me back to the Spotify, imagine it, build it, scale it, tweak it kind of model, or even some of the maturity mapping stuff that we've been playing with internally. The idea that like there's different kinds of work in the ready and there's different kinds of work in the world, and how we align ourselves against those different types will create trade-offs in terms of how they get done.
Yeah, absolutely. And having my it's not even a counterpoint, it's just the shadow of that is having spent some time in early days of a growing company where it was very like go be in your zone of genius and everything will work out, and seeing the core business crumble is also a way that that can go.
Yeah,
So
balancing act.
it's so tricky. It's such a tricky thing. And this is where having real participation and decentralization is the right thing, because we're sense making with a large group of people what is the most important and where those zones of geniuses are and what is needed and how to invest. And it takes a lot of pressure off of the tip of a pyramid in a traditional structure to be figuring that out for everyone. And also, like when you do that as a team sport, it takes real time and attention that we don't always give it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And obviously the journey of a business or system or organization is not instantaneous. And so you have to earn your way to diversification, and you have to earn your way
Yeah.
to exploration around the corner. And so, yeah, if you're 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, you're probably working core business only.
Yeah.
And you're probably looking for a lot more people to just learn and master the things that are known.
Right.
And then you unlock progressively more opportunity to carve new paths. And that is in some ways challenging, because now you're looking for a different kind of participation and a different kind of
Yeah.
player
Yeah.
than what you've had.
Totally. I mean, I've shared with you the metaphor that I'm working on in my head right now about the Ready as a band that I'm excited to talk more about. But like my expression of this is that where we've been is like the Beatles in Hamburg. And it's been like a small group of people for a bunch of early years getting so many reps, playing our 800 shows and having our 2 albums worth of songs and really figuring out how to do what we do the best that we can do it. And
Right.
I would say in terms of that core business, in terms of doing transformation work inside of mostly large systems, I'm like very proud and very bullish of our maturity there. And now I think like I'm feeling the itchiness of like, okay, but like what if we, went to India and studied transcendental meditation and make Sergeant Pepper? So I'm just like, what's next? Like, let's make a documentary. Let's have merch. Let's have new records.
Right.
Let's cover songs. Let's like launch independent albums. And it's like that's a moment in a system's maturation where there's enough core, there's enough foundation, there's enough coherence for there to be evolution and experimentation and diversity. But then my impatience is like, I want all of it now.
Right. Totally. Me
Because I'm
too.
excited.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about is the role of source energy. And what I think about when I think about musical artists is some have that and some don't, actually. So, there are definitely artists that come out and they do their thing and it's a shtick. And after a couple records, it's tired and it's over. And then there's David Bowie's who are like, every 2 records, there's this source energy of like, now I'm Ziggy Stardust, bitches. And it's just a whole different scene. And I think that as systems grow in their ambition and they grow in their scope, they need more source energy. And if you're a hierarchical system, you can sometimes get away with all that source energy coming from one person because they can bark orders and hold people accountable and basically sweat everyone. You can really get a long way with that kind of energy if you're willing to work in that way. But if you're not willing to do that for all the reasons that we've listed for the last 100 episodes of the show, then you can't do that alone.
Yeah.
And so you actually need an expansion of source energy that occurs. And I think that's what we're like feeling into.
Oh, I also wonder if part of both of our stroppiness about this right now is like, I think in self-management, sourciness is so much about energy that just catalyzes things to happen. And at this moment of time in the world, I do feel more depleted than
Right.
usual.
Right.
And so where in the past I might have just been like, I'm just like an idea fairy and
Right.
I'll make half of them come true myself and the other half I'll just like sprinkle around and see what happens. It probably is taking more now to both like gin up, like
Yep.
muster up the goods and then also do the execution for the things that are mine and then also be patient with the things that aren't. And that is,
That's
again, that has nothing to do with anybody but me
right.
and,
And the moment.
the second year of pandemic.
That's why I feel like the context we're in right now really calls for a do less but better attitude.
Totally.
And I think that's what I'm really calling for, is I'm calling for all the systems and all the individuals in them to like look at the portfolio of shit you're juggling and figure out where is the thing that I can actually still muster the energy to be sourceful and to be ambitious and energetic and have a high quality bar, and just go there. Like really, I think narrowing the scope would be really helpful. And I think there is just like some low grade therapy to be done. And I don't know how I'm going to do this for everyone, but that like you are entitled, you are allowed to want things to work in a big way and to want things to be amazing and excellent. And I think a lot of us, based on things that have happened to us, the way we've been managed, our identity, our experience, are hesitant to demand that of the things that we work on. And so I have run into several people throughout my career where I'm like, hey, you know, does that look good enough to you, or does that feel good enough to you? And they're like, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, no, you should want it to be the best book you've ever held in your hands. Like, and that's that's a lot of my own hangups and principles about what good looks like and what's meaningful and what's a life well lived. But a lot of times it feels like people are hesitating to allow themselves to want more and to want things to be exceptional. And I just feel like in some ways, because of the energy depletion of the pandemic and because of the lessons we've learned from it about the fragility of life and systems, to me, that's all the more reason to be like, if you're going to work on something that really gets you fired up and fucking crush it. Like have fun with it. And that doesn't mean an 80-hour week. It means like having a sense of what good means to you and really getting there by hook or by crook.
Yeah. Should I give our listeners our recent template that I made us?
Yes.
Okay. So Aaron and I have been dog fooding everything that we're talking about right now in terms of our own role profile and getting real about what we can do and not do, and the ways in which we're holding roles and kidding ourselves and where our aspirations really are. And so what we did recently was to populate a spreadsheet. I adapted this from an agile methodology called WSJF, which stands for weighted shortest job first, but I made it about us and about individual roles. And so what we did was say, Google Sheet, what is the name of the role? What is the value to the ready? What is the market impact or the value externally? How uniquely capable are you versus someone else being able to do it?
This is all self-report, by the way.
All self-report. Although we had a spirited discussion about some of these things. And then finally, how life-giving is it to you? Like, is it an energy suck, or would you do it for free on a sunny day, And we just populated that, and I'm going to make a template that is blank, and anybody who wants it, you can email podcast@theready and I'll give it to you. And my suggestion to you would be write down all your roles. And if you're in like a traditional job, try to parse that into really what you're actually doing, like what the projects are that you're on and what the tasks are that are repeated. And then go ahead and just populate it for yourself. You might be surprised at how the numbers shake out. And then, what Aaron and I both did after discussing and futzing and prioritizing these was basically like, okay, well, for our bottom sum number, our bottom half, how are we rehoming these? Or how are we retiring them? Or like what's going to happen? Because this is, first of all, this is a myth that we are living. And second of all, to Aaron's point, if you want to sweat something you love and just sweat that.
Totally. And it creates a flywheel effect that I'm excited about because I've seen it in my own career. When you really do love something all the way and you give it, your full attention or most of your attention and you hold it to a high standard, the fact that so few people are able to do what Rodney just described sets it apart right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Because everybody else, 5 billion other people are spread across 20 things.
Yeah.
And they are not empowered to hold them to any standard, and they're not empowered to steward them. And so at the end of the day, just having that level of deliberateness, I think really unlocks extraordinary value and sets you and the project or initiative or company or whatever apart in a
Right.
way that is really exciting. And I think, you'll find really enriching.
Yeah. And even if you are not someone who has so much agency like we do it anyway. Because if you see that you're holding 20 things and actually like 5 of them you're phoning in or like LARPing or, pretending or hating, you don't have to quit overnight, or maybe you do. I don't know your life. But what you might do is like think to yourself, okay, in the next 6 months,
Yep.
how can I creatively wiggle my way out of this?
Yeah.
Is there, is this new hire who really wants to prove himself someone who would like to be on this tiger team instead of me? Cool. Let's see what he thinks about this.
Yeah. Or even just psychologically letting yourself off the hook.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is where I give 100 and this is where I give 50.
Right. And like, this is a thing I hate.
Yeah.
And this is a thing I hope goes away.
Yeah. And that's okay if you don't have total agency, right? I mean, you have to decide how to tread water. But I think there's a big difference between trying to show up to 20 things like you're a superhero and failing and just being like, no, I'm going to really crush it here and here. And everywhere else, I'm going to tread water. And I'm okay with that. I'm going to give myself permission to be that way.
And the wisdom to know the difference, right? I mean, I truly, as I was filling this thing out and looking at the numbers, there were some real surprises in there.
Yeah.
There were things when I did this in November that my head would have told you I thought were super important and I was super fired up about, and the numbers did not prove out. And those things are no longer on my stack.
I think it's scary to fill something like this out because there's a part of you that wants to hide from that truth. And it's very easy for me to hold an idea in my head of like, I'm juggling a bunch of stuff and I'm really important and I'm special and I'm doing it. And then you really look in and you're like, what do I actually enjoy? What actually matters? And it turns out that half of it is either not for you or doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a real ego hit,
It's like, here's the thing I love that no one cares about. That's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. And here's the thing everyone cares about that I'm flubbing. And so I just think there's a lot of vulnerability in the activity is all I'm saying, which is great. And that's a reason to lean into it. But don't be surprised if you get the template and then are like, I'll do that tomorrow. Because you're going to want to squirm.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to give one example from our noticings because I thought it was cool. To your point about here's a thing that's important that I hate. One of the things that was very low on my list and is no longer on that list is holding a role of speaker for the Ready. And what I realized doing this exercise is that doing speaking stuff like from a stage in front of an audience, it's just not something that I like. And I've done a lot of it and Aaron does tons of it and it's important for our business and the market wants that sort of thing for various events and conferences. And I understand because I want them too. And what that brought up was like, okay, the version of that I love is doing this podcast. It's doing other people's podcasts. I want to double down on the podcast. I want to do more stuff like this, like more Twitter spaces, more panels, more interaction with the people out there because I love all of that. And there's this one part of this that's important that I don't want to do. And so that kicked up a really interesting conversation of what would it take to have a stable of speakers from the Ready who are absolutely lit up by being on the stage talking about Brave New Work. And that's a really interesting thing to figure out, but I had to stop kidding myself in order for us to have that conversation.
I love that as an example, especially because it's a really good example of thinner slicing.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be at the level of spokesperson, just kind of stuck with a bag of stuff where you like some of the stuff on the plate, but not the other stuff on the plate. And to just be like, we don't have to do that. We don't have to live at that level of abstraction. We can cut this up and say, this person is a conversational convener
Yes.
And this other person is a ham. And that's in no way describing the two of us. And
I
that
was just going to say, I'm like, I don't know who you're talking about.
and that's okay. And in fact, that's actually really good for the business.
Yeah.
Because that level of clarity then allows you to say like what's missing, what isn't, et cetera. So yeah, that speaks to me.
And even the recognition of the ham on the other end of this podcast right now, even the recognition and the openness in the conversation for me to be able to say, doing that is totally depleting. And for Aaron to be like, that is like spinach to Popeye. Let's fucking go. Like those are important conversations for your business and for your team.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cause I'm like, oh, this is just something that always sucks and everyone hates it. And it's like, no, that's not true.
Yeah. Well, and to me, that's throughout this whole conversation, that's one of the themes is that you're going to be centered on your experience of stewardship, of ambition and vision, of overload, of burnout, of what's energizing and what's not. Everyone's centered on their own experience of that stuff, right?
Of course.
So we need to be conversing about it openly so that we can figure out where everyone stands and what's actually needed for the system. And we can't do that if we pretend that everyone's like me or that everyone's not like me or that we're all on the same page, because we just aren't.
Yeah.
And it, that'll allow us hopefully to lean into our superpowers, and where we have a gap in them, to find people that actually have those superpowers and bring them into the system.
Yes.
And that seems like a pretty good place to draw things to a close.
On that note, I'm going to go be on someone else's podcast in a moment. In just a few minutes.
Convener.
I know. If y'all like what you're hearing, please review us or tell 2 to 3 friends about us this week, please.
Very specific. A quick tip of the hat, as always, to Taylor Marvin for making us sound good. Brave New Work is produced by The Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. You can get in touch with us by emailing podcast@theready.com. And as for you, thanks for listening. Now go change something.